Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. It's a rather brisk day in early spring here. If I could get more sunlight on me, it'd be a little warmer. Hopefully the wind won't get in the mic too bad. Tell you, man, getting a decent microphone stand, what a pain in the ass. You buy them, you pull them out of the box, and they just kind of fall apart right in front of your face. You got to kind of wrench them back together. Today is an episode that is kind of coming to me in a bizarre wave of get out there and record this. And this happens every once in a while. I've had this notion to move into the question of where are we? At my smoke lounge, we were watching a series of sort of cosmology videos, all kinds of different theories, videos on the sun, videos on stars, videos on galaxies that are far away, videos on the moon, on the earth, on Uranus, why it tilts, where all these planets come from, what are planets, what are stars. Now, if you're new to this show, you're going to be really confused. You're going to be like, dude, we already know all these answers and we know exactly where we are. So what on earth could this possibly be about? Well, have a seat. On this show, we liken it to being in a low light situation. You are in the center of either a hurricane or a tornado of disinformation and chaos reality, of which we no longer acknowledge everything the way that man has interpreted it to date. In the center, we've got some leather chairs and maybe some love seats and sofas. We got little drinks over there if you want them. Got some cigars too. Even if you don't like cigars, ladies, you can sit down and the smoke doesn't hit you in the face at all. It's a special kind of room. On this show, we're not so sure about everything, right? We may be sure about what we don't know, but we're very skeptical about saying what we do know. There are two types of people in this world. There are many types of people, but the two that we're going to categorize right now, and categorizations are always based on the objective of the current thought process, right? But when we're determining what is true and what is false, there are people that feel very insecure about not knowing the truth, and therefore they cling to every answer they can get their hands on. Well, we know this, we know that, we know this. And it's not like in this group we don't say the phrase, well, we know. But it's more fundamental and absolute and easy when we say it, I think, on most cases, right? The first thing I want to say is that the people that have dedicated their lives to finding out where we are in the universe, whether or not they be right or wrong, aren't always evil. They're not always dark, and they're not always wrong. For all we know, they've got it all correct, or as generally correct as it could be. The void of space, the expansion of the stars, the earth is round. But I'll tell you this much, when you get older and you start pulling back from the stuff that you've been indoctrinated to believe when you were young, there's this magical moment when you start to disconnect from a lot of the guessing that's been going on in science. Like I said in a previous episode, we have a listener, David, who films stars with his 600X, I think it's a Sony camera. And stars take on a very interesting appearance within this camera. Could be some anomaly in the camera itself, but it seems to take on, and by the way, it's been filmed by a lot of other camera species, and they publish their videos on YouTube, and it seems very similar. Stars seem to have a center to them. They also have what appears to be a lot of almost refracting water light, or some plasma external sparking that's going on the outside. It's very interesting. One could say it's the atmosphere just wobbling the light, and it's just refracting. Once you start looking at what appears to be sort of this plasma glow on the outside of this dot, a lot of times it seems to take the shape of the actual radius of the actual, or I should say diameter of the sphere. And it appears to bend around the edges of this object. So if you had a pool light that you're filming from, let's say, a mile away, and you know you're shooting it through the water because you're shooting it over a canyon at your buddy's pool in the backyard, you know that the water's in front of it, there's the light, and there's going to be wobbly refraction due to the density and movement of water. And any of the distortions of the light are not going to be in any way related to the geometry of the light itself, because they're not in association with each other. So that's just one example. When you pull back and you go, well, are stars really like our sun, but just really far away? We can tell that some stars are brighter than others. So if it was a carpet in the sky, some firmament dome with little crystals on the inside of it, then someone is either varying the light bulb size, or it's not what it is. I know this might sound ridiculously stupid of a conversation for especially newcomers, but we're going to continue to dig. My feeling of recent, if the stars are not the stars, and I'm not really convinced either way, think about the membrane that goes around an egg. Think about the fact that, inside an egg, let's just use like a chicken egg, the shell probably has varying levels of density, right? And so when you're in there, and if you had operational eyes inside of an egg and you start looking around, you might get some light shining through a little bit brighter in some of the regions of the inside of this egg, of the shell itself. But what if it's not a shell? What if it's made of something a lot more permeable, a lot more cellular? You might have a lot of little peeking holes. And so everything you think is a star is really just a little window into the brightness that's on the other side. The Milky Way, well, you know what the Milky Way is? It's actually the equatorial rim around this eggshell that we're inside of. Why does it seem like everything in the stars are expanding away from Earth? Because it's an eggshell expanding away from the center core of the embryo that's inside. Are we the seed in that analogy, or is the sun the seed? Not sure. You break open an egg, there's those weird little suspension thingies that hold the yolk in the center. It's kind of like the gross little string that's in there. Maybe the sun is part of that. Maybe it's part of the umbilical cord of photons that keep us alive. What's interesting about being alive, the more that you really step out of your body and analyze it, is that you have what Arthur Dent in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy started to describe as this sort of paranoid feeling of something, if not everything, in the universe is wrong, that something isn't being told to you. And Slarty Botfoss told him, well, that's just normal everyday paranoia. Everyone has that. And I think it's a fascinating little thread in the sweater in that story. There's a paradox of where we are. And I'm experiencing it right this very second. And you can experience it every time you go outside at night, or during the day. Just go outside, where you don't have a roof over your head, and just look up. Just look up at the deep blue sky, Notice the sun over there. That's the same sun that was in the intro. But go out at night when the sun's down and the moon's up and look at all the stars. 1,200 stars the average eye can see before full acclimation and without light pollution. If you can go out in the desert and really concentrate, you can get up to about 2,200 stars. It's this amazing thing, and it is limitless to our brains, meaning it is either so large that we can't conceive of how large it is, or it's ever expanding. Who knows? The paradox is that we sit here a part of wherever we are. I'm here. I'm in this universe just like you. Whether it be a computer simulation, a flat dome firmament, or a heliocentric ball in the middle of a very insignificant spiral arm of the galaxy, we want to know where we are. And some of it probably starts off with the uncertainty that is sort of the feral uncertainty. You know, I want to know and therefore I get it. I am Bam Bam and I'm gonna cause a ruckus if I can't get my answer. More feral. As you mature, you come to peace with the fact that you don't know exactly where you are. And then you would just sort of intellectually like to know where you are. And perhaps one makes peace with their God. Maybe you make peace with a lack of a God. And you gaze and you look out into the sky. And you think about, well, what if I could fly in that direction? How disorienting would it be? Would I bump into some invisible barrier? Would I freeze in the void of space? Or would I find another civilization out there, some alien race that would greet me and say, welcome, we've been waiting for you. It took you so long. I think it's very interesting that when we die, I should say it that way. I think it's very interesting that when we talk about the afterlife, and this is obviously in some Christian realm of things, but there are various tendrils of this theory in other religions, as far as I have been able to discern out of conversations with individuals. But heaven is always represented as up, and hell is always represented as down. Poor down. Or get a bad rep. My honest belief as to why that is the case is that when we dug down, or even experienced a volcano, which are, they're all over Europe and every single continent has them. There's molten lava down there. And so once someone had to have seen that and went, wow, that's absolutely gorgeous. Let's touch it. And they burned their hand off. And without knowing what it was, probably deemed it as some bloodline of Satan or something, some version of their ghostly punisher. According to the white man's history of the Latin America, even pre-Latin America, pre-Inca, they sacrificed children into volcanoes. I'm personally not convinced that any of that's true. You can show me a pile of bones, I don't give a shit. I think that's to make the South American natives look savage so that you can do anything with them you want because they're just animals. I don't buy it. Machu Picchu was built by very brilliant people. And you don't get brilliant people and savage minds existing in the same body in most cases. Dick Cheneys exist only every once in a while, right? But the sky is blue. The sky contains the sun. The sun contains warmth. The sun makes things grow. Now, if it weren't raining in a particular region, they may start to demonize the sun and say, geez, where are all the clouds? I think it's interesting that when primitive man was trying to discern where they were, they ended up thinking that everything had consciousness and everything had intent. But we don't talk about it much like that. We hear about rain dances and rituals. I just saw some dung flinging parade that they have in India, or thousands of people actually get hurt throwing turds around. And the whole thing is to make it rain. It's hard to believe that when you're in a plane and you're flying at 35, 40,000 feet and you're looking out, at this incredible infinite bed of clouding that can happen underneath your plane, that somehow a human being down on the surface, dancing in a circle, pretending to be a hawk or whatever, is going to somehow convince the gods or the particles that are the clouds to behave in a particular way. It may very well work like that. It may be that we manifest reality. But through expectations, we create weather patterns. I always thought it was interesting that there's an interesting weather pattern that seems to happen in various regions based on the overall personality of the society. And it goes something like this. The amount of times I have looked at the weekly calendar, and it's great Monday through Friday, but then horrible on Saturday and Sunday, and then it gets good on Monday. And I'm in an environment where everyone's sort of pessimistic about life. It's amazing. I've seen that. Just the second you get a day off, it turns to shit. Because it's sort of the kind of personalities of the people that were around me. Here in Southern California, it's actually fairly interesting. A lot of times, I think majority of the time the weather's good, but it's usually, crappy Monday through Friday if it's going to be crappy, and then it's fantastic for the weekends because we expect that to be the case. We pay a lot of money to be here. Again, overall, the weather in Southern California is fantastic. So, what's interesting about having a burning question in your heart or in your gut is to figure out why you have that question and what do you hope to gain by having the answer to that question. That's what I ask myself. Like, why? What do I care what's outside this planet? As I've told you guys several times on the show, I think we have to live for the now, right? And there's an overall truth to that. Sometimes you've handled the now, and you got a little bit of a break, and eat your lunch outside, and you just start looking at the sky, and you start going, well, geez, I got time to think about other things. So I'm waiting for files to copy or files to upload. I got time to think about things. Let's think about it. Now, when I was watching the YouTube videos the other day, the interesting thing was that, every time you see a picture of a galaxy or galaxies or some deep space picture, the problem is that it's coming through an organization that is absolutely untrustworthy, called NASA, or any of their subsidiaries. We now pretty much have concluded that the Hubble telescope doesn't exist. Maybe they meant to make it and it doesn't work, and so they ended up putting a big giant, the exact same brand of telescope inside of a 747, and they call it the Sofia Telescope, and they fly at really high altitudes, and they bring it around, they tip it, and then they shoot these deep space pictures. My cousin has worked for the group that takes those pictures on the Sofia. All right, it exists. And so as soon as the imagery starts hitting YouTube and this beautiful high-definition screen I'm watching at my smoke lounge, my heart kind of splits in two, right? It forks because I'm like, God damn it, I want to believe that these pictures are real. But it's coming through a lying organization. However, I think they only lie about the things that they can't accomplish. But shooting a picture of deep space, well, that should be possible, right? There's giant observatories on the tops of every mountain around here. There's a beautiful one in Hawaii where they shoot the laser at the atmosphere, burn away the atmosphere, and then take the picture. Amazing. I tend to lean on the side of the fence that has validity to these pictures. So now we have a picture of deep space. There's all kinds of deep space pictures. What's confusing to me is how you can have a deep space picture where it appears to just be a bed of stars. Then you have a deep space picture with a bed of stars with a nebula beautifully organized in the center of the photograph. It never sort of like meanders away from the edge. There's no edge violations. It's almost as if, wow, we just trapped a nebula inside the frame. Seems like space would be a lot more chaotic than something so beautifully kept for cinematic purposes. However, if you're creating a computer simulation or a painting of some sort, that might be exactly the way you would frame it. Hey, we got a big canvas here. It's pretty big. Why don't you spend a couple of years creating a really good picture for us? Okay. You're doing a particle generator inside Maya, and you just want to keep it within the bounding box of the frame shot. Okay. Then you get the picture of sort of a more deeper space looking shot with fewer stars, and you have, 50 to 100 galaxies in the shot. Little tiny spiral arm disc things that are floating around in the shot, all different orientations. And those start to look a little hokey. For those of you who are astronomers, cosmologists, let's think about the claim of the Big Bang. Let's think about the claim that the universe is going in any direction of expansion. This notion that all of the particles were unified at one point, but when you take a picture of all the galaxies out there in space, they're all at wonky orientations. I suppose that's possible. Might be like the exploding pyro at a fireworks show. 200 JJs are blasted into the sky and lit on fire, and all of a sudden they start zipping around the sky. All different trajectories, right? Because they're packed inside the explosion packet, perhaps in a unified way, but the way the fuse explodes, it's a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. Maybe the density of the gunpowder is more powerful on one side versus the other side. It's not supposed to be the way it works with the Big Bang, by the way. That thing's supposed to be utterly perfect. The numbers of how big our galaxy is varies from decade to decade, and it varies between institution to institution. When I was a young kid, I believe the diameter of our galaxy was said to be 210 million light years across. I think I've seen that number revised quite a bit since then. But it's big. It's huge. There's supposed to be more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on the beaches of the world. Right? Doesn't really seem like a stretch at all if you want to adopt the model that we currently have in pop science. We don't even know how big the universe is, as I said in my first episode. To review, we either have an infinite, non-existent container, meaning we don't really have a container, it's a true void, and somehow we have a limited amount of mass inside that infinite space, and somehow it's all connected. It's literally physically connected, like the string theory might suggest, because otherwise everything just diffuses, right? It just goes off into infinity and never congeals to make any life or anything. Or we do have a container that's bigger than the stuff inside, and the stuff inside is bouncing off the container from time to time. In this overall ecosystem of bouncing off the container and going in and out and in and out, it starts creating life. It starts creating inanimate objects. Again, we're talking about a godless model. And then you get down to sort of the matrix idea. And I've done an episode on this, and I've talked about it a lot. But it's a very interesting concept. And if you have a simulator that you live in, then you live in a world where it's all perception. It's a delusion. For those of you who've played any type of multiplayer online game, and for those of you too old to do it, or those of you too young to give a shit about it, which I don't blame anyone, trust me. World of Warcraft, for instance, is probably the flagship of MMOs ever made. There's a lot of other great MMOs, but that one started in 2004. It still runs to this day. And if you're in it, you feel like you are in we're a real planet. You really have an ocean. You have continents. You use blimps to get around. At least in the first version of the game, some people can teleport all over the place. And it took several versions of the game before they actually introduced flight. And they're interesting, excuse to us about the fact that they didn't have flight, like independent flight. You could always fly from point A to point B, but they carefully flew you through the world from point A to point B. And what we didn't know was that they had invisible walls all over the place in the sky. And so that's why they couldn't turn on flight. They had to redesign all of their worlds, which I think had about at least 3 continents at that time. And they had to get rid of all the old designs. They got their tools upgraded. The engine got upgraded. And when I first played the first version of the game, which was late 2005, because I knew the thing would eat my life up if I started to play it or any time earlier than that, I used to have this buddy. We used to hang out, and we would explore areas of the world where there was no design. So we constantly try to pierce these mountain edges because there were walls, or there were places where it just became too steep to get there. But we found one little entry point on this wall, on this mountainside, where we got over the edge. And it was sort of like getting behind the scenes of a dream or getting behind the scenes of reality. And all of a sudden, it was this huge plains of nothing. The floor was like a funny little pattern. I'll see if I can't find a photograph to put in the video. And we explored, and it was interesting. We couldn't fly, but man, we could go all over the place. And even when flight got turned on, there are walls. There's a ceiling. You fly up, man, you can get way up there, but you will hit a limit where you're just bouncing. You can't go anymore. There's a firmament dome in World of Warcraft, okay? The reason why I mention that is that if we are in a simulation of any kind, and we could very well easily be in a simulation. I mean, think about it. Think about it this way. What is the effort to create an MMO, which is very intense, costs hundreds of millions of dollars to do it, a good one, or really creating physical reality with ethereal particles and all the laws of physics? It's a hell of a lot easier to do it in software and have the virtual programs, like the characters in the movie Tron, believe that they're in a reality, but they're actually in a virtual reality. Much less expensive. Probably really tough to debug, but so would reality, right? The interesting thing that precedes this question of where we are usually stems from 2 different types of personalities and their stages in life. The most common one that I have met, especially, again, being an entrepreneur and sitting in smoke lounges in the afternoon waiting for clients to respond or whatever, calls to come in, is that there'll come a point where maybe you've done everything you wanted to do in life. There's plenty more you could discover, and you're not giving up on life by any stretch of the imagination, but you've got a resting place. You're like, geez, I can die now, and I'm good. Don't want to. I know there's plenty of life out there, and things I can't even conceive that are wonderful that could happen to me. So again, it's not some suicide pact that everyone's in when they get to this state. There's just a point where they're like, okay, I now have the ability to think about this existential property of my existence in this universe. Why am I here? The other one I run into from time to time is the kid that really doesn't give a shit about anything that society says that he should give a shit about. I say he as a proverbial he. And there's something to respect about that opinion as well. It's very rare I find that happening, but some people will say, look, I don't really care about money. Traveling, yeah, whatever. It's really more of a tourist brochure thing. Yeah, so I look at the Parthenon, I look at Machu Picchu. Sure, I'll be fascinated for 5 to 10 minutes as I'm looking around. Yeah, the pyramids in Giza would be mind-blowing, but I'm never going to get a chance to go inside, so I'm going to be sitting on the outside looking at a stack of rocks. In the end, what's most important to these individuals sometimes is, where am I? Who am I? The philosophical question, right? Now, probably even more rare than that are individuals that have the ability, either through wealth or through maybe academia, they get jobs teaching this sort of questioning, and they're able to sit on the steps of a university and just postulate between the two of them. Imagine that we had the ability to create some sort of deep thought university, and I'm just one person there. You're one person there. We're all working together to try and decipher information, but we're able to sit in conference rooms with whiteboards and books and encyclopedias and internet connections to sit there and chew up one of these episodes at nauseum for 8 hours, perhaps for days and weeks and months and years, advancing our theory, dismissing theories one day and bringing them back another day, until finally we kind of conclude something, write a paper, write a book, make some money for the university. Then we're on to the next subject. Perhaps we go on a nice round robin. Monday, it's where are we? Tuesday, it's are aliens real? Thursday, what's the shape of the earth? On and on and on. Kind of sounds fun, right? These are the Greek philosophers that had the ability, I guess according to history, to do this kind of thinking. What's fascinating about that is that they came up with some really good answers, some really good perceptions that are largely lost on the mass population because they took a lot to understand some of their answers. Some of them were boiled down beautifully. What is it, Kansas? Kansas was talking about, what is it, was it Socrates or something that was saying from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, we're all just like dust in the wind, you know. Pretty funny. What I find interesting is that when people get themselves inside of paradigms are very comforting if you're afraid of chaos, or if you're not afraid of chaos, but you've been in a world where there's so much uncertainty. You're like, God, I just need a pillow and a mattress and a warm blanket just so I can rest my mind. One of the other beautiful questions you can ask when asking any philosophical question about your current state of being is why. One of the big anomalies for flat earthers are planets, because you can see them. You can zoom up on them. You can buy a 20,000 power telescope in your backyard and look at Jupiter, see the dot on it. You can look at Saturn and see the rings on it. You can. I've done it personally at my friend's backyard, Griffith Observatory. Backyard being the most convincing, right? Why would those things exist? If the answer comes back with a big, oh, it's super important that they exist, and you've got these, ridiculous computer simulation pictures of Saturn where NASA blew the algorithm at the top and accidentally created a hexagon, or is it an octagon? I can't remember. And so then, they're coming up with stupid theories of why that's the case. It's like, it's a computer fucking photograph and they messed it up. Really sorry, folks, okay? But take all that nonsense away and you probably will come up with, well, it just simply is. And if it simply is, then this overall arc that everything has been made for a reason starts to diminish. And with it, too, diminishes any notion of a firmament dome, of God's intervention to create sort of a playground, a snow globe of reality. Let's say that you go along with that with me just now. You're a flat earther and you're like, yeah, that kind of sucks. There are all these planets up there and we don't know what the hell they're up there for. And then you come back to the moon and the sun being the same size in the sky. Oh, now we have causality again. Now we seem to have intervention. A moon that's way too big for our planet. It's, on a wobbly orbit, averaging about 237,000 miles away. And then we have a sun that's supposed to be 93 million miles away. Two random objects that happen to be orbiting, or I should say one is orbiting us and we're orbiting the other, supposedly. But when they eclipse, my God, they're the same size. Interesting. We're told that there's craters all over the place. But when we do the math of what a crater really is, there aren't really any craters. It's all bubbles from the bottom of the bowels of whatever celestial object you're looking at. The big crater in Arizona is nothing more than a volcanic pop from the ground. It looks exactly like Diamond Head in Hawaii, a volcanic crater. Objects that hit the Earth from space would create a gouge in the Earth, very similar to the fictional character Superman coming in from Krypton. There's not a single one of those on the moon, and yet the moon has no atmosphere to protect it. So what about all these objects in space that come whizzing by that we're told that are, in the last month I've seen 3 warnings of gigantic objects swinging by Earth. The Russians are really into that too. They report that a lot on RT.com. Selling Doomsday. I got an episode about that. But nothing seems to ever hit Earth, does it? Nothing ever seems to hit the moon, does it? I mean, the moon should have been pummeled in the last 100 years in a really big way, right? We should have been able to see something utterly beat the shit out of the moon once. Whether it be right on the edge of the horizon between the dark side and the light side, it should have happened, and we should see tons of debris being ejected into space, but that's never happened. Earth should have probably been hit by something. You know, meteorite comes in the size of Rhode Island. By the time it goes to the Van Allen belt, it gets chewed up by the atmosphere. It's the size of a Greyhound bus, and we get another Arizona crater, according to popular science, right? But it never happens, does it? Ufologists. Okay, let's go there for a little while. There's all these interesting stories about different alien species. And what I recently have been able to discern out of a magazine that covered this and the origins of these species, there's always the same sort of factual archetype about the debut of any one claim of an alien race. A couple or an individual experiences an abduction, an encounter. They draw pictures. Some of these, are obviously individuals that aren't artists trying to render spaceships. These spaceships lack any logical logistics of harboring life, of having propulsion systems in them. They're usually just, ridiculous constructs and pictures, and they draw some aliens inside the window, and everyone's like, oh my God, it's so real. But they'll say, okay, I saw gray aliens. They had almond eyes and a big bulbous head. Then all of a sudden, everyone is seeing grays. A small portion eventually confess that they made it up, but most people hang on to the stories out of sheer embarrassment. The second that reptilians are theorized out of an abduction, wow, everyone sees reptilians. The Norwegians, the Aryans. There's a bit of a comfort to these, you could call them Aryans. The Norwegian whites that come in that are really tall, they have eyes that are a little bit further apart. Very bizarre faces. And there are people like this. There's at least 2 of them in Westworld, the show on HBO. But they are the supposed defenders of Earth. They protect us from all the bad guys in space. All right. There are theories that the Greys are controlled by the Reptilians. But they come from completely different places in the universe. Or I should say, perhaps our galaxy, right? There are stories of, ships in the sky battling, I believe in the 1600s, right? Over France. One guy is the only guy that ever documents it, and they eventually kind of figure out that maybe he's a charlatan. But just like all the other scams in the world, the story gets printed on the front page. Ufologists will just hang on to the original front page and not worry about the retraction. Perhaps they accuse the retraction of a cover-up. But the interesting thing is that the overall innocence of man that believes in this stuff or not believes in this stuff, or like I try to encourage you, you toy with the belief of this stuff until you make up your own mind. It's okay, whichever way you go. As long as you're not entertaining denial in your system to hang on to these things, and you're actively doing that, and you're bullshitting yourself, which, again, I'm not accusing anyone of actually doing that. As long as you're not doing that, and you're still entertaining Greys and Reptilians and these Aryan, people from space, well, fine. You're a trooper. You're out there investigating it for the rest of us who maybe have doubts or we haven't heard of the theory yet. Hopefully you'll report back if you find anything interesting. Keep the flame alive, right? We're all just trying to get a little bit of orientation to this reality. So I do this show, right? And it's tough doing this show. It's tough to come up with new topics. It's tough to be interesting. and really to myself, to be honest, right? I try to make this show the way that Steve Jobs made products for Apple. He said, I make things that I like. And I know if I like it, then a lot of other people like it too, on average. Except that little transparent cube. That was so far out there, we just couldn't grasp it. We couldn't trust that a tiny little cube without a giant fan in it could be powerful at all. People who bought it loved it. But every once in a while I get a bizarre comment about, how well I'm doing this show. And, I understand their critique, and I actually welcome, not all the shows are that great sometimes to me. But, one of it is, well, show me your channel. Show me your 270 episodes, and then we can have a conversation about how easy this is. But one of the things that happens if you do create something like this, and even if you just have a journal at home that you're writing your ideas in, and I would hope great detail, and the reason why I make that distinction is if you just write footnotes, you're not getting a lot out of your own thoughts. Go into it, right? I've got notebooks in my house with 10 pages about how to really build an anti-gravity UFO and fly it around based on all the research that I've done, plus a lot of my own inventions inside this stuff. I'll write 10 pages on how I think that the soul comes into existence. Great detail. One of the things that's starting to happen to me in the recent weeks, and it's probably been happening to me my entire life, but I wanted to share it with you just in case any of you are having the same sort of experience. I think it's happening to me because of this show. Because in order for me to find new subjects, I have to expand my mind even further and further and further. Because I think that the universe is fairly infinite in the direction of overall consciousness. I think that there's no limit to how many times I can do that. But what starts happening is you start opening up your aperture of the camera of your mind, and things are going to start happening to you that have never happened before because you're able to bring in more data at one point in time. One of the things that's starting to occur to me is that I'm seeing a river of eventualities or possibilities swim through me like I guess you could say I'm sort of a projector, an old movie projector. And these storylines will come through my mind, potentially fully abstract outside of anything that's going on in my life, right? So that's where these things turn into episodes, right? This idea comes through and I'm like, oh yeah, man, I never thought about that. And then boom, an episode comes out. What's also happening is this string of thought that will relate to the eventualities that pertain to my exact situation. So I might have a problem I'm trying to solve, whether it be a personal one or a professional one, whatever, internal, external. And 4 or 5 scenarios or more will go through my consciousness right in front of me. And the beauty of what's gone on for me personally is that I used to process these as my thoughts. Like, oh my God, why am I having that thought? I'll give you a kind of a fictional example of where you might be having this, where I've had this too as a young person. Let's say you're in public and I don't know, you're waiting in line or something, and someone cuts in line in front of you or is taking forever. I was driving through a fast food place the other day, and a guy in front of me was taking forever to order, and then he got up to the counter, up to the window where he's supposed to pay, and however he arranged his order, he took probably 5 to 10 minutes. I don't know how long it went. He just took forever talking about his order and talking about this and that and how he wanted this fast food place to make it his way. And my God, he had everything made his own way. If he could have got ketchup to be refabricated, he would have. And I'm sitting there thinking, what I'm going to do is, my choice is just to wait behind the guy, and, this particular run through the fast food place is going to take a lot longer than normal. But in my mind, a bunch of scenarios will go through of, could I do something to speed it up? And you get to all the rude ways you could do it. You could honk your horn, you could yell out the window, come on, dude, let's move on, da-da-da-da. And those things aren't me. Those behaviors aren't me, but they're flowing in front of me. And when I was younger, I would either fall into it and do it, or I would entertain it as if it were my own thought. And lately I've been like, hey, these aren't my thoughts. These are just eventualities that the universe has available because it's a free world and I have choice. But consequently, they're not all negative. In fact, very few of them are negative. But it will be it usually occurs when you don't have a quick answer. Because where you have a quick answer in life, you simply engage the quick answer, you do analysis and make sure you're picking the very best one, of course, hopefully. But then you'll move through life and, you'll forget. How many of you have had a bill that was haunting you 10 years ago? 10 years ago, and this is true for a lot of you, but you can't even remember what the bill was. You assume maybe it was rent, maybe it was a car payment, maybe it was your credit card. You were really just preoccupied with it for days, maybe weeks. Maybe you couldn't pay it for a month and a half. Maybe you slipped rent by 2 weeks or something. But today, you don't think about that stuff. It's long gone. Everything's okay. You're all right. You made it through that round. So the next time that happens to you, you probably shouldn't go through all the anxiety and just realize it's going to eventually resolve itself. Now, you can't sit on your hands. You got to go make money and hustle, whatever you got to do. But there's this interesting thing once you start to sort of subscribe to the notion that you are a soul inside of a vessel. We don't really think about the physical model of that relationship. For those of you who watched Deep Space Nine, you have the symbiotic woman, Dax, whatever her name was, right? Beautiful supermodel that turned into an actress and did an amazing job. She, in her previous life, was a man. There's a symbiotic being inside of her that keeps getting transplanted through this race. I forgot what her race is. But the Benjamin Sisko, the captain of the base, had known this symbiotic being inside of her in a previous life as his buddy from the academy. And so he would call her the old man, and they would have this conversation. And as soon as she takes on the symbiotic creature, she has most of his memories from the past, and so she's able to see her life as she has been born into, and she also sees the previous lives of her being inside. There's a name for that, and I completely forgot. Wish I was more of a Trekkie, I guess. But if you think about the fact that your vessel is in position A and your soul is in position B, if you can imagine for a second that the universe sort of flows through both of you, like there's almost like a gap between the two. This river of information that we've talked about a couple times from Philip K. Dick and a few others, to see it and not adopt it is a very interesting process. To see it and acknowledge it and hopefully learn from it, you saw a bunch of options that you didn't choose. And the one that you chose became sort of the definition of who you are within this place that we are, right? One of the most bizarre notions of the universe that I think that we can contemplate as beings, and I've alluded to it several times on the show, but the idea that there's only one of us, and that I am you and you are me. It's a fascinating idea. It's sort of a weird paradox of thinking. There's two forms of that you and I are the same being, and that we're actually living, obviously, singleton lives. You are in my timeline and I am in your timeline. And the time really doesn't constrain us at all in our life, right? Take it up one more notch and you start to think, well, maybe I'm creating all of you as a sort of a bunch of friends within this reality. It's all an illusion to me. If I have 2,000 subscribers on this channel, I've just made that up in my brain, right? A step further than that would be to play with an ultimate notion that there's only one being in the entire existence of all things. which we call a God, and that God is us, and we are God. Obviously, we don't have all of our tools in the tool chest as a mortal human being. Or maybe we do and we simply don't know. Law of attraction is a very interesting thing. We see people in the world who are very humble and they suffer. And we see people who are very arrogant and appear to have everything that the world deems as the ultimate prizes of existence. I once had a friend of mine who was very wealthy. They encountered their wealth through a marriage. They themselves never did anything to acquire that wealth personally. When I asked them later, I said, well, did you ever envision yourself in this reality? I mean, this is intense. This is a lot of money. This is incredible. And the person said, yeah, of course. I always thought I would be in this situation. Law of attraction. This person always envisioned, although did not grow up in a family of this extreme wealth, she didn't grow up in any bad household, but she envisioned herself being extremely wealthy, and guess where she ended up? Boom. Where are we? Does it matter? Let me put this analogy to this answer, to this question, I guess. How many of you like to get presents? Whether it be Christmas, your birthday, or just a random gift from a loved one or a friend. What do we do to make a present? A really good one. Let's say we're the gift giver. We look into the consciousness of the person that we are going to give this present to. Usually we have a emotional connection to the individual. We love them, whether they be our child, our spouse, our friend, family member. We love them. We want them to have a moment that is fairly guaranteed. A moment of surprise, a moment of incredible curiosity, and if we do our job right, the minute that the gift is revealed, they are pleased, they are happy, they are humbled. And it doesn't really matter how they receive the gift. We know that the job has been done, whether they feel embarrassed or they don't know how to respond, but they feel wonderful. It's all good. But we purchase an object, or we gain access to an object, we make it, whatever it is, and we conceal it inside of a container. Maybe the container is natively beautiful, maybe it's not, and we wrap it inside. If it's not, we wrap it inside some sort of paper or some cloth or something to give it beauty. Another interesting mystery to the puzzle. We pick the paper carefully usually because we want it to be something that's indicative of the person we're giving it to. If it's an adult, we don't choose prime color, cartoony paper unless that's kind of the goofy personality that they are, and that can be just as endearing. Doesn't have to be physically big, it could be teeny tiny. Maybe it's a ring. Maybe it's earrings. Maybe it is something big. And we give it to them. We're excited. We're excited making the gift. We're excited in the whole process. We try to find the right time to give it to them as well. We don't corner them in the bathroom when they're on the pot. We wait. It's a morning thing, it's an evening thing, it's an afternoon thing, whatever. It's a weekend versus a weekday. Maybe we wait for them to have a bad day, and then we spring it on them. If you were to study in some EKG, the heart rate and maybe the mental patterns of the individual receiving the gift, I would be very interested in knowing if the anticipation of what's inside is not more radical than the actual reveal of the gift itself. The fact that someone thought about them is very important, right? The thought that counts is what they always say. We live in a world where we cannot really get the answer of where are we? We're the character in the book trying to ask the question of what the binding in the paper is all about, the author that wrote our narrative into the story. We are constantly staring at the gift when we ask the question of where we are. But so far, we haven't been able to figure out a way to pull even one tiny scrap of the paper off the gift, to see perhaps what the vessel looks like underneath. Sometimes you wrap the gift in the box it came in, and so as soon as the box is revealed, you know it's an iPhone, you know it's a whatever. But sometimes it's just a plain old box. So maybe through philosophical exploration, we are able to see the box inside. But it still doesn't reveal what it is. Perhaps just getting the form of the box understood starts to reveal what it could possibly be. Like they used to say on the line, or What's My Line, the show on TV, is it bigger than a bread box? Once it's bigger than the bread box, everything that's smaller than a bread box is out of the picture. And perhaps that's what we're doing when we philosophically ask the questions, where are we? And we start to observe and look around at the empirical evidence that we have at our disposal. Well, we know it's not that. I don't know that we have a single answer. One of the most interesting things that's happened with all this virtual reality stuff that's coming around, especially the head-mounted display technology, and video games in general. I mean, just think about it. Head-mounted displays are nothing revolutionary. All you're doing is gluing a video game to your head. That's basically all you're doing. Everything that's on the screen is stuff we've been working on for 30, 40, 50 years. We are attempting to create virtual realities that we can experience. We want the computer processors to be fast as possible, the GPUs to be fast as possible, memory, hard disk, accessing, everything to be as fast as possible so that we can make beautiful realities. They're convincing, giving us the hubris of control over a reality that we can have fun with. Well, I can't control this one. I don't have any answers as to where the hell I am in this one. So we create a subset, a game. And we learn a lot when we do it. We learn how difficult it is to simulate reality in general. One of the things I think is the value trait of this show is to say a lot of you are very busy. A lot of you are young parents. You have a lot of kids, or maybe you're older parents, whatever. Perhaps you're just exhausted mentally. You want to think, but I don't know. It just happens, right? Kind of thought about everything that occurred to you. If you had the means of making a show, you would, and I'd be blown away at what you're saying, for sure, which is why comments in the videos are always awesome. I'm trying to dig up these gems of realization so that we can talk about it. And I'm standing on the shoulders of other folks that have already sort of sparked the ideas in me. I'm about to hit 270 episodes, but that means I've got another 30 to go, just to finish this season. 30 new ideas I got to come up with that are interesting, hopefully. I've got to do a good job of bringing out the twists and turns of these episodic themes, right? And I'm certain I'll find them. Isn't that weird? Through your comments, you guys are making a lot of suggestions in the comments, and I want you to know that I'm taking inventory of all those suggestions. So even though I haven't gotten to your episode, if I can, I will do your episode. You know, for some things in life, we're able to find the answers. Or at least we're able to find answers that we're good with, that give us a little bit of solace, a little more peace in our life. But sometimes we bump into questions like these where perhaps our entire lives, whether we live to be 100 years old or 500 years old or 10,000 years, the most that we can do is come up with little sayings that'll make us or give us more peace with uncertainty, and perhaps see beauty in the uncertainty itself. It's limited by what we come up with as human beings. You know, there's plenty of concepts that will be on the table 100 years from now that aren't on the table right now, and so I'm not talking about those things because I can't conceive of them, right? A lot of you will conceive of things that I haven't conceived of, and if you leave me a little comment in the video area of YouTube, you'll spark my mind to go research something. Hopefully you feel me. The meaning of life, right? Life, the universe, and everything. I am far from a deep thought computer, that's for sure. If you haven't gone to deepthoughtsradio.com, please do. It's got video and audio, locked Facebook group, and Patreon. It's going to be a short bumper today. Hope you enjoyed the little discussion. I will see you in the next episode. Take care of yourself and someone else. Over now.